I just found 15 fantastic movies that are all completely free to watch right here on YouTube. I've even included links in the top pinned comment down below so you can start watching these movies right away. And they're all vastly underrated movies, starting with my number 15 pick, 13 Days. Now this is one of, if not the only, really good movie about the Cuban Missile Crisis. While the movie does show you plenty of other things happening with the Cuban Missile Crisis, it focuses a lot on Kennedy and his decisions during this entire thing. Kevin Costner actually has a really good role in this, somewhat reprising his role from the movie JFK. For anyone who likes historical dramas, or even if you just want to know more about the Cuban Missile Crisis, this makes a fantastic movie, but it is about as dry as most historical dramas like this tend to be. Now, they do have Anchorman included for free on YouTube right now, but I didn't include that on this list because I don't consider it to be an underrated movie, but Will Ferrell's possibly most underrated movie of all time is Everything Must Go. Now, this is not your typical Will Ferrell movie. He's a little funny in it because he's a funny guy, but it is not a funny movie. It's maybe lighthearted at times would be the best way to describe it, but he plays a man whose wife is leaving him and he decides to sell all of his stuff on the front lawn. And through the process of shedding all of his stuff, he kind of learns why he is the way he is, why his wife's leaving him, all that kind of stuff. It can be really tender at moments, and it's just kind of a nice, sweet movie starring Will Ferrell. So if you're interested in seeing him do something different than he normally does, this is a great watch.
How much for this?
You want to buy that?
How much is it?
50 cents?
I'll give you 25 cents.
Yeah, I just can't do that.
And then Nicolas Cage makes the list. He's a man who has a lot of underrated movies in his filmography, but Season of the Witch makes this list because it kind of stands out as something different for him as well. You've also got Ron Perlman in this and Claire Foy as the witch. Now this is a PG-13 supernatural medieval thriller. And as far as those go, Season of the Witch is an excellent one. We don't actually have a lot of really good movies in that genre, especially from the past 10 years or so. And it's not like this movie accurately represents what life was like in the 14th century. No, this is just kind of a good monster movie. I mean, it's a witch, but it's moody, it's got a great look to it. Nicolas Cage is not really doing anything over the top in this movie. He's playing it pretty straight, so much so that this role could have gone to almost anybody else and it would have worked as well. I don't really consider this to be much of a Nicolas Cage movie, but that said, it still is a pretty cool flick that went largely unnoticed. My next pick is based on a book by the famous author John Grisham, and while it's not the best movie based on his work, it's certainly the most underrated. Runaway Jury. Now the book actually took place in South Mississippi where I grew up, but the movie takes place not too far from there in New Orleans, mainly just because it's more visually interesting on screen. And I tend to agree, it's got a good look to it in this movie, but the real reason to watch Runaway Jury is they show you a lot of what's involved with setting up juries, jury selections, and all the manipulation that can go along with that. Now it is John Grisham, so much of what you're seeing here is accurate, but this is an extreme case. It's not like this happens with every jury in every situation, but Runaway Jury does make for a fantastic thriller. It does have courtroom elements, but you would hesitate to call it quite a courtroom drama because most of the drama actually takes place just outside of the courtroom, which is kind of what makes this one special in that genre. I'll point out that Castaway is available on YouTube for free right now, but it's not really an underrated movie. Another one similar to it, though, that I do think is criminally underrated is All Is Lost, starring Robert Redford. Now, this was one of the last movies that he starred in. Not the last, but it's pretty damn close, and it's one of the best ones he starred in at the end of his career as well. And just like Castaway, he's the only character in the movie, so it really required a lot from him as an actor. Now obviously he's very seasoned, but still cool to see him get to do something like this very late in his career. In fact, this director would go on to do A Most Violent Year, which I just recently recommended, and more recently Kraven the Hunter, which is due out in theaters fairly soon. There are quite a few really good Lost at Sea movies out there, and All Is Lost is certainly up there with the best of them. Now, if you go click on the links I put in the top pinned comment down below to watch these movies right away, but you find that they're private or unavailable to you either in your country or because you're watching this video in the future and they've been taken off of YouTube, you can still access them using today's sponsor, Cyberghost VPN. Now, like all VPNs, Cyberghost keeps your web browsing safe, secure, and private. It's very important to do that nowadays. The world is just a different place and you need to protect yourself online. If you're going to though, you might as well use the one I recommend because Cyberghost VPN is going to allow you to watch Netflix, YouTube, Hulu, different streaming services in a wide range of countries, which immediately unlocks more movies and shows than you could ever possibly hope to watch. And it's super easy to set up. You can use it on up to 7 devices at the exact same time, and they've got 24/7 customer support if you do need help getting things set up. But they even offer a 45-day money-back guarantee, so if you're not happy with it for any reason, you can try it out for a whole month and a half and then get a full refund. And it's pretty cheap, just a hair over $2 a month to, like I said, unlock more movies and shows than you could ever possibly hope to watch. That's less than half the cost of one new release movie rental. And again, you'll be able to just access almost anything you could want at any time that you want using Cyberghost, and you're protected. It's a fantastic deal. So again, go check out my link in the description below, get the discount, use the 45 days to see if you like it, but it could change the way that you watch movies and shows. But speaking of movies, let's talk about the rest of the movies on this list. While my next pick is technically a family-friendly animated movie about owls, it's also from director Zack Snyder, and it looks and feels like it. This is an epic action-adventure movie that just happens to be an animated movie about owls, but it is just one of the most visually stunning movies you could ever possibly hope to watch, and that's not an overstatement. It really is. You do not need to wait for kids to watch this one. If you want stunning visuals, put this movie on. It's absolutely incredible, and it's got some pretty good storytelling too. I would put this up there as one of Zack Snyder's better movies, and certainly up there as one of his most underrated. Now, I'm a big Guy Ritchie fan. I always have been, and there's a few Guy Ritchie movies on YouTube right now for free, including the 2 Sherlock Holmes movies he did with Robert Downey Jr., but what I consider to be potentially his most underrated movie is also on YouTube, King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. Now, this movie was kind of panned critically, and audiences didn't love it, and I honestly can kind of tell why. It did not meet expectations, and that's because this is a wild, over-the-top fantasy movie with some pretty heavy metal influences, in my opinion. Just like Legend of the Guardians, Legend of the Sword has stunning visuals from beginning to end. I thought Charlie Hunnam did a great job as playing Arthur in this movie, but you've also got Jude Law doing an excellent villain, and the fantasy elements in this telling of King Arthur are much more robust than they are in a lot of other tellings, and I can understand why those things sort of didn't mesh with people's expectations, but upon a second viewing and kind of knowing what you're getting into, this is just a wild, fun movie with a fair amount of Guy Ritchie flavor, and again, some fantasy elements that are dark and twisted and fairly different than what you're getting from a lot of the other Disney-produced movies like this. Next up, we've got a low-budget sci-fi gem that stars Pedro Pascal in Prospect. This movie starts off with a father and daughter who are miners. They're looking for this specific ore that can be found in the root systems on an alien planet. And then they have a run-in with a couple of bandits. And what's so cool about Prospect is it feels very much like an old-fashioned Western. And for a low-budget sci-fi movie, Prospect is beautiful. It's all pretty convincing. Very rarely are you looking at things recognizing that you're watching a low-budget movie. But if you were to take the exact same story, I mean, even almost down to the exact same script, change the setting to the Old West, this would easily adapt to a Western. In fact, it's written very much like one. because they're out on the frontier of this new planet, and so it's all very appropriate. The futuristic gun that they have in this movie is much more akin to a musket than it is like any kind of laser blaster. So Prospect earns big points from me, not just for being good, which it is. It's an excellent little sci-fi flick, but it also gets big points for being dramatically different from anything else in this genre. My number 8 pick is another low-budget sci-fi pick that has jumped around on different streaming services, and I recommend it every time I see it available. It's been on Netflix, Prime Video, but right now, you can check out Freaks right here on YouTube.
You gotta be strong like your mom was.
You knew my mom?
This movie stars Emile Hirsch, who I love as an actor, as this kind of crazed father. In fact, Freaks can be fairly disturbing once it starts. It's not clear why this young girl is being held captive in this house, but that's the mystery you're trying to solve with this movie, and it goes into some amazing places for such a low-budget effort. The world building you get with Freaks is incredible, especially considering there's only a few locations in this movie. You also get a really outstanding performance from Bruce Dern. He typically gives outstanding performances, but you just kind of don't see it coming in a movie like this. In fact, I would have never expected him to do a movie like this, and he absolutely kills it. This one, I would gladly welcome sequels to. In fact, I'd be surprised if we don't get something of that sort in the future. But as it stands, Freaks is just a really cool little sci-fi gem. If you're the least bit interested in some of the footage I've showed you, and you like discovering new movies, make Freaks one of the first ones you watch off of this list. My next pick stars Matthew McConaughey in one of his most underrated movies from early in his career, Lone Star. Now, released in 1996, this was a modern-day Western that takes place in a Texas border town. Now, Chris Cooper is actually the star of this movie. He's the main character. He plays the sheriff of this little border town. And when the buried body of a previous sheriff is found, it stirs up this entire mystery. Lone Star is a fantastic sort of West Texas thriller. Movies like Blood Simple, No Country for Old Men, more recently Nocturnal Animals. Lone Star fits right along with those, yet it's not nearly as popular as some of those titles. If you ask me, I think the more recent Stephen King adaptations that we've been getting over the past 10 years or so have been miles better than the ones that we got in the 80s or 90s in most cases, but one that came out a whopping 15 years ago that I think just did not get enough love at the time is 1408. If you've never seen it, John Cusack plays a man who's either a skeptic or a debunker, and he's going to this infamous 1408 hotel room where all sorts of supernatural things are said to have happened. Samuel L. Jackson has a pretty good but short role in this as well, and the production value on 1408 is just top notch. Yes, you spend most of the movie in one room, but what makes this so incredible is it just gets more and more insane as the movie progresses. On paper, I would not have expected something this wild and over the top to work, yet it comes across really well. It's an exciting, thrilling horror movie that's not totally terrifying, but it's a lot of fun to watch and doesn't feel as derivative as a lot of horror movies at this level tend to be, especially movies from 2007. While it was a great year for movies, it wasn't a fantastic year for horror movies, and 1408 stands out as one of the best from that year. Next up, I've got a fantastic, fun, caper type of a movie that was directed in a way that was definitely influenced by Wes Anderson, The Brothers Bloom. In this movie, Mark Ruffalo and Adrian Brody play a couple of con men who swindle rich people out of their money. Their target in this movie is played by Rachel Weisz, this eccentric millionaire who has all these hobbies, and the movie itself has this kind of odd tone. Like I said, it feels a little like Wes Anderson at times. This is written and directed by Rian Johnson, who did Looper and Knives Out. And while I don't consider Brothers Bloom to be his best movie, if you like Knives Out, either of the two Knives Out movies, and you've never seen Brothers Bloom, I highly recommend it. I think you're absolutely gonna love it. Now, still to this day, one of my favorite shows of all time predates me by decades, The Twilight Zone. And the Twilight Zone movie is available on YouTube, and I think this is just a total gem. Now, one reason this movie might not be as popular as it could have been is people actually died during the making of it. It's actually a pretty tragic story if you want to look it up, but the movie itself is actually an anthology horror flick that, again, is not overly scary. You know, it's based on an old TV show, but they took some of the best episodes from the Twilight Zone and turned them into this movie with an incredible high production value. In fact, with most anthology movies like this, I tend to really enjoy one or two of the stories, but not all of them. And with the Twilight Zone, I feel like I really like each one almost equally. Point is, it's rare for anthology movies to have this many solid stories stacked up in them. In my opinion, I think the Twilight Zone is one of the best. Now, my number 3 pick on this list is kind of a dark one, but it's got a huge cast. We're talking Ryan Gosling, Naomi Watts, Ewan McGregor, in a highly overlooked movie titled Stay. In this movie, Ewan McGregor actually plays a psychiatrist, and he's trying to prevent one of his patients, played by Ryan Gosling, from committing suicide. But the more he tries to help, the more he begins to lose his own grasp on reality, and this becomes a really twisted thriller with a lot of mind-bending elements. You, as the viewer, will lose your grip on reality as well. That's kind of the point. This movie's got a beautiful, glossy look to it, but is also just incredibly moody and dark. Considering suicide is one of the themes, or at least one of the major plot points, the movie's not as dark as you might think. Like I said, it's moody, but it doesn't necessarily leave you feeling drained like other movies in this genre can. If you're a fan of anyone involved and you've never seen this one, trust me, this is kind of a standout gem, especially for Ryan Gosling. He absolutely kills it in this movie. It's one of his more underrated performances. Ron Perlman also stars in my number 2 pick, but this time he plays a Viking in Outlander. Now, despite the name, this actually does not have anything in common with this show, Outlander, which is wildly more popular than this movie, but in Outlander, Jim Caviezel actually plays a man from outer space who crash lands in the age of the Vikings. And for me, I think that's interesting enough. The way it's set up, and you get this fish out of water, this man who's not really human living with these Vikings. There's plenty you could do with that, but there's something else going on in Outlander. There's this giant beast prowling out in the forest, and they have to kind of band together to try to fight this thing, and it is wild, especially for kind of a lower rent movie. Outlander has some fantastic action sequences in it, and it's this incredible man versus nature Viking story with sci-fi elements. I mean, what's not to like? It made my number 2 spot for a reason. But my number 1 spot stars Ewan McGregor and Naomi Watts again in an incredibly underrated movie about the Indian Ocean tsunami. The depiction of the wave in this movie is absolutely incredible. They made it look so convincing. And then most of the movie is actually the aftermath of this wave. This family gets ripped apart and they're trying to find each other. Tom Holland is actually very young in this movie. He plays one of the kids and does just an incredible job. I mean, he makes this thing feel so emotional, even at the young age in this movie. This is one of those movies, even if you have no interest in watching a story about that tsunami, it's so well done. It's so harrowing and just kind of perfectly executed. I highly recommend it, which is why it made the number 1 spot. As a reminder, the full list of all the movies discussed can be found in the top pinned comment down below, along with links so you can start watching them right away. But these movies will not be available on YouTube forever. In fact, many of them will leave fairly soon. So make sure you click the subscribe button, maybe even the bell icon. That way you get notified when these videos come out so you don't miss the movies before they're gone. But don't forget to check out that Cyberghost link. Go try it for 45 days. See if it helps you unlock more movies the way it does for me. But I'll keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special YouTube episode, and you will see me on the next one.